starting to see this trend based on customers we have and all the courses that are getting taken, where a lot of people are starting to take these very general, basic courses.
Yeah.
But it's no longer just for their IT staff or their hardcore like cybersecurity stuff. We're seeing a lot of people basically trying to get just cursory knowledge of general things that are happening in the organization, and no longer just like siloed to the cybersecurity team and stuff like that. They're trying to kind of spread the knowledge out to kind of raise that like baseline knowledge gap. So people that are kind of, getting phishing emails and making decisions in real time, let's kind of arm them with certain knowledge enough till we hope they make the right decision more times than not.
Yeah.
And so trying to get that information out into these organizations is now, I think it's an interesting shift from the days of old where, your cybersecurity pen testing team or your app security team was basically like that last gate before you pushed anything live.
Yeah.
They were always in their own little corner. They didn't really tell people what they were doing and things like that. Have you started to notice a shift away from those like siloed security teams and things like that?
I think if anything, I'd say the security teams are probably in the front of the app itself rather than being behind it, and along the whole life cycle of it, because people are starting to realize that the app is only as good as it is secure.
Right.
Because it can be the greatest app in the world, but if it's giving away all of your customer data, it's not going to be a good PR game changer for the positive. So I think app security is starting to become more of a standard operating procedure for every scrum, every rendition, or every life cycle of every heat of what the development life cycle is looking like.
Yeah. DevSecOps is finally catching on, I guess you could say.
Yeah, they're no longer fighting. I think if anything, they're more involved in the life cycle of the development of the app itself, and like specifically how it's developed and which way it's engineered, rather than having to wait till the very end and rebuild it all over again. Yeah. They're kind of involved in the initial conceptual conversations.
Yeah, so I run our DevOps pipelines, and so like my challenge is basically how can I keep up now with getting my devs more and more information earlier on in the cycle so that they can kind of not have to do it after the fact. And so it's like trying to get security scans, and there's like this weird balance, right, of how long does it take for a build versus like how much coverage we're getting and things like that. And that's like this weird little thing I have to compete with, because like I would like to scan everything every time you commit, like all that kind of stuff. But the actual like compute required to do that in a timely fashion, especially for UI devs, they tend to be, they want to write faster and commit more often and things like that, which is great, but trying to get the tool chains caught up. And I'm starting to see a shift where people like want it, and so hopefully, right, like the de facto Jenkins, they finally, like a couple years last year, they decided to re-architect everything. They were just like, it's too bulky, it sits too far back in the pipeline. Let's try to rethink how that works. And so I do a lot of fighting with that, trying to get more and more data. And it seems to be there's a lot more vendors now that are letting me do that. I remember there was a period where, like, security software, nobody had an API.
Yeah,
and
I remember those days. That was 2011. I think Splunk was the only security product that had an API that was RESTful. Yeah. Everybody else was non-API based, because from an orchestrator perspective, we were way ahead of our times. I think we were about 3 years too early to the API movement.
Yeah, and some of them still, some still have like SOAP APIs.
Yeah.
And it's like, what?
And some custom homegrown APIs. That like some web sockets, and some were like, wow. So yeah, it's starting to become more mainstream API integrated, but there's a lot of vulnerabilities with having a RESTful API. If you basically can remote control the product.
Right. Do you guys, because you guys live and breathe, I would assume, by APIs and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're an API traffic cop.
Do you guys find yourself having to convince people for APIs now, or like are you at the point where it's like you don't have an API, like we're not even going to start this conversation?
There's some security products out there that still don't have API integrations that we scratch our head to. I think that they'll learn the hard way. I think they probably figured that out a little too late, and they have to go out and rebuild the product because the product wasn't built on top of a RESTful API base. So I think they've got to basically rip out all the guts and rebuild it all over again. But they're still out there. There's some legacy stuff out there that was built in such an like homegrown code base that they weren't able to adopt it to APIs that we're still fighting for. So we have to do like custom scripting and shell scripting and Python scripting in order to get it to work. But there's, we're hoping that the mainstream products are starting. I think it's primarily the reason why people are replacing those products is because of the lack of RESTful API integration.
Yeah, I've even seen some next-gen firewalls that don't have a CLI anymore And coming from like the DevOps, where I'm trying to spin up on-demand environments to run testing and things like that, I was like, oh, let's design it correctly. And so we'll add the route into the next-gen firewall. When we're scaling up and scaling down these accounts, we'll take them out. But there's no CLI to the next-gen firewall that we were using. And I was like, I what? And so it was interesting trying to have to then figure out ways to basically write Python that spoofs it to go in, and it was like, I don't understand how this is still a thing in like 2018 when I was doing that.
I still think I think in 5 years you'll have, I think most of tier 1 will be automated, and most of security will move themselves into more triage and remediation and some type of tier 2 and tier 3 approach, because tier 1 is such a grunt level job that no one really wants to do. It's kind of your entryway into security, but you don't want to be there very long. After 6 months of being on the job at a tier 1, you're kind of over it and you want to move on. So one way that we try to mitigate the turnover is to automate the tier 1 approach so that people can move into more remediation and type of kind of forensic approach to different types of stuff, to roles.
Do you see? It's an interesting trend because you guys are basically automating that tier 1. Do you see customers like moving those people into actual forensics types roles, or are they now growing it like an in proportionate rate because they're like, oh, we can automate this, we can hire less security people?
I think if they repurpose the people, because everybody's without security people, that's the problem. They just repurpose everybody to different roles, whether it's an incident response team, IT DevOps, it could be on the remediation and endpoint team. It could be in the SecOps approach where they're dealing with malware outbreaks, et cetera, or forensics for being able to determine how did the outbreak, phishing, education and training. So I think they're repurposing people. I've never heard of a customer, nor have I ever seen a customer fire people because they brought an automation. I mean, if anything, they feel relieved that they can actually have other people do other jobs that they couldn't haven't been able to hire for the last 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot. Like a lot of the courses that are getting heavy hitting stuff is like, it's no longer just those like entry level stuff. It's people actually now having time to like actually dig in deep to a tool and things like that, where I think before it was kind of like everybody's always playing catch up. Like, I have all these logs, it's just hand wave basically.
Yeah.
Like, we're keeping it, don't have time to dig into it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're excited to see here at BlackHat this year? Any buzzwords that are sticking out?
I mean, automation seems to be the hot topic now. Everybody wants that. Most of the automation vendors are relatively close to each other. We've got some big announcements with Securonics OEMing our product with their SIM. So that's a big push. So this is the first SIM SOAR OEM to kind of compete with the Splunk and Phantom relationship. So you're going to start seeing more of that. I think Anomaly and the threat intelligence, you're going to see announcements around Cybersponse is now partnered with Anomaly, where they're going to be using our product to enable their threat intelligence. And then Symantec is selling Cybersponse as well. So we've got some really big traction with some big names and big sales forces out there.
Nice. Yeah, so I was my previous role was with a behavior analytics company 3-4 years ago, and it's crazy to see how that's like now started to basically, creep into like everything. They're like, oh, like this is where
Securonics is a behavioral analytics company, and now they're a SIM company.
Yeah.
I mean, now they're on big data analytics, and they're cloud only too, which is interesting. They're competing with the Sumo Logics and the Loggly type cloud SIM only. No more on-premise SIM.
On-premise is a nightmare for SIM
stuff.
It's trying to get those systems to scale at the rate that everybody's trying to pump data in, but they still want the cost of running like a desktop. And you're like, no, the compute required for all of this stuff is nuts. It needs to be cloud only just so we can get the benefits of the scale and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think, but that's like an interesting thing. There's a lot of large organizations that don't want to go to the cloud now. Especially they were migrating, but now all these recent hacks about misconfiguration seems to have kind of pumped the brakes on a lot of that stuff now.
I think what Google's doing with Backstory and Chronicle, that's a big game changer, because they're essentially giving away free log management. I mean, it's a relatively inexpensive. It's next to nothing, and you have all of Google's infrastructure to be able to ingest all of those logs.
And now it's a commodity now. It's just
SIM is going to become the one of probably a commodity where it's just everybody has it, and it's probably going to be for free.
Yeah, and I think Elasticsearch, the way Elasticsearch the last couple versions released, you're just like, it's like everything is now just finally hitting like critical mass.
Yeah, they just announced their new SIM product.
Their
kind of version of Elastic.
Yeah, I love the Elastic stuff. I love hate, coming from the data analytics company and having to manage those Elasticsearch clusters.
Yes.
But I'll take the managed Elastic Cloud all day, every day. But yeah,
Well, thanks
Cool.
so much.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
having
This
me.
was awesome.
I
Appreciate
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
in touch.